you want a rich, chewy, fudgy brownie that's not going to put a giant dent into your bites or points, I think I have just the thing for you, and it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I am sharing on this channel recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Today's recipe is for a dessert, a light and chewy brownie. Pause. What you should have been seeing on this sign up here, and what I should have just said, was light and fudgy brownies. Not light and chewy, light and fudgy. Don't know where I got chewy from. Was not in the recipe, was just in my head. And I don't know why. But this is the sign you should have been seeing. So, wait, is that going to be backwards? Anyway, it should have said light and fudgy, not light and chewy. So, there you have it. Shocking as it is, I'm not perfect. Okay, on with the show. So if you like your brownies on the chewy side, this is the recipe for you. And pardon my jaw, it's tightening up a little bit, so hopefully I can speak clearly enough for you to get what I'm saying. So this recipe is great on its own. I have had people make it into like a cosmic brownie, making a little frosting and putting sprinkles on the top. And I decided I'm going to change it up a little bit myself, but we're going to go over the base recipe, and the changes aren't going to come until it comes out of the oven. So let us go over the ingredients that we're going to be using. 3/4 of a cup of pumpkin, pure pumpkin puree, not the pumpkin pie mix, which already has seasonings and sweeteners and everything added in. We have a 1/2 cup of milk and a 1/2 cup of sugar-free chocolate syrup. I have already combined those into one rather than measuring it out in 2 different cups. We have a cup of flour. We have a cup of cocoa powder. We have a cup of granulated sugar replacement, and if you know me, you know I use Swerve. And then there's a 1/2 cup of brown sugar replacement, which just adds a little caramel note to it. But if you didn't want to get the brown sugar, you could just use a 1.5 cups of the regular sugar replacement. We have 3 eggs. We have 2 teaspoons of vanilla, a teaspoon of salt, and just a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, because you don't want these to get cakey. You want them to be fudgy, but you do want a little bit of a lift. We also have some baking spray, which I'm going to spray my 9x9 pan with. I already have the oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I have some foil because I'm going to make a sling. So let me move these ingredients out. We'll prepare the pan and then move on to the next step. Okay, so even though I'm using the foil sling, I'm still going to spray the pan, especially the sling is only going to cover 2 sides, and just in case anything gets underneath the foil, I don't want anything sticking. So I'm also going to put a little bit of spray on the foil once I've lined it. So you're going to want to go a little bit longer than you think you will need to, like that, because you want some overhang, and it also has to go down into the pan. And you can see it's too wide for the pan, so we're just going to fold this over to turn it dull side up. I don't know if it really makes a difference, but so fold this, and I decided to use foil instead of parchment because Parchment definitely does the trick, but sometimes it can be a little difficult to get into the corners, so I just decided that today I would use the foil. Okay, so that's perfectly aligned in the pan. You want to make sure it's pressed into the corners, so you press down and then fold this corner over just to make sure it holds onto that. And you can fold this up if yours is a little too long like mine was. So our pan is prepared. Let me spray just a hint of the spray on the foil, and we will move on to the next step. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put all the dry ingredients together, particularly the cocoa powder, which has a tendency to clump. You don't want big chunks of just dry cocoa powder in there. So I usually put that in by itself and whisk that up. You could also sift this, but I'm one of those lazy sifters who just uses a whisk. I'm just gonna whisk it up. So that looks pretty good, no big chunks. Add in the flour, the salt, and the baking powder. Oh, it actually all came out. Put this aside and just whisk all of these dry ingredients together. You want to get them all combined so you're not having pockets of chocolate or salt or anything like that. So once it looks like a homogeneous color, that's pretty much done, and it's nice and airy. So I'll put this over here and get rid of the whisk and bring in the other ingredients. Okay, so I've already cracked the eggs just so you don't have to see me cracking the eggs on camera. I did bring back the whisk because I'm gonna need it. So we're gonna stir it off, and let me get my handy silicone spatula. Just make sure I get all the pumpkin. I'm gonna add the 3/4 cup of pumpkin. And we're going to add to that just the almond milk and the sugar-free chocolate syrup. And we're gonna whisk this together before we add in the sugar replacement. Now the sugar replacements that I use is Swerve, as I mentioned, and those are a 1-to-1 replacement for sugar. So if you're using something other than Swerve, just make sure it's a 1-to-1 replacement for sugar and you'd have the same measurements. If it's one of those ones that's sweeter than sugar and you use less, you'll have to adjust according to the manufacturer. Okay, so that looks good, nice and creamed together. Gonna add in the block, it seems like. Okay, I left this out overnight, so it seems like it got a little moisture. It'll still be fine. And the brown sugar replacement, which is also usually clumpy, so it shouldn't be a problem. Break those up a bit before I start to whisk those in. And that'll pretty much melt into the wet mixture. A lot of recipes, when it comes to sugar, they'll have you add it in with the wet. It's considered a wet ingredient sometimes because it melts into the liquids. So it basically becomes part of the liquid, unlike flour, which would absorb some of the liquid and become a paste or a dough. Okay, now we're going to add in the vanilla and the 3 eggs. And I usually will break up the yolks before I start whisking them in. Now you could use pasteurized eggs. You could use egg whites, which would probably be helpful if you were on one of the WW plans that counts yolks and not whites. So you could replace that with 6 whites or whatever the equivalent amount of the refrigerated stuff is, the container. Okay, so everything's looking pretty homogeneous here. Can move this stuff aside. Now I'm switching over to the silicone spatula and adding in the powdered mixture. You don't want to overwork this like you would with a whisk. So you're just going to fold, usually turn and fold, just so it's not too aggressive. You don't have to worry too much once it gets in there, but I also don't want to, like a cocoa shower, like I almost got there, going all over the place either. So you don't want to be too aggressive and have all the powder fly out of the bowl. Once it starts to come together, you can slowly start to mix it a little bit more and mash it down to get some of that powdered cocoa moistened. And then scrape down the sides so you can get all that cocoa goodness and the flour and everything. You want to bring it down and up, flipping it around so that anything that's stuck to the bottom, sometimes flour, you'll sometimes find a bunch of flour at the bottom when you've emptied something. If you just sweep along the bottom and turn it up like this, usually you don't have that problem. Okay, so that looks good, nice and thick and creamy. So now we're going to add it into our pan. And I will usually, when it's this thick, like spread it out, drop it into different spots rather than one big spot, just because it's easier to spread if it's already all over the place. And you could, if you wanted to, add some add-ins here, some Lily's chips or no sugar added chips, some nuts. If you had the bites or points and you wanted to use them for nuts, that's fine too. Like I've said before, this is your journey, so you do it how you need to do it. All right, I'm gonna get my offset spatula so it's a little easier for me to even this out. No, I think I'll try it with the spatula. Because not everybody has an offset spatula, so. And like I've said before, when you're using a sling, it will sometimes shift a little bit, so you have to make sure you're adjusting for that. And just, I usually try pushing it into the corners first, because those are usually the hardest places to get covered. And sometimes it'll pull out of the corners, so just double check and make sure the corners, I mean, it doesn't have to be too precise, because once it's baking and softens up, it will spread to fill in those corners. But I like to make sure it's even. And like you know, the progressives don't always help things look even. And that looks pretty good. So this is going to go into the 350-degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes until a toothpick comes out with moist crumbs on it. When it comes to brownies, you don't want it completely dry or the brownie will be dry. So you want a few little moist crumbs. And I'll hopefully be able to show you that when we get there. I'll be back. Okay, the brownies just have about another 2 minutes or so before I can check them again. So I'm going to start on our secret added touch. This is not part of the recipe, but you can add these things for 0 bites, 0 points. I have 3 graham crackers, which is 7 bites. Since these brownies make 9, this is not going to count as, wait. Okay, so this is just going to add 1 bite for the graham crackers. I'm going to crush these up. It doesn't have to be too fine, but you don't want giant chunks in there. If you see any, you can break them up. So, and this is optional. There's the brownies, let me go check those. But this part is optional. This is not in the recipe. So you'd be fine with just that recipe. But if you wanted to bump it up a little notch, this might be the way to go. Okay, so here are the brownies. And if I put a toothpick in, comes out, it's got little tiny bits of brownie on there, which is what you want. Now, this is going to be very hot, so I want to keep these mitts on either side just as a reminder that it's hot. But while it's hot, if you want to do this s'mores step, this is where you would add a half a cup, this is where you would add a 1/4 cup of marshmallow fluff for 0 bites. And that way it's still hot, so it'll melt onto the brownie. And you can spread it around and let it melt. You want to make sure you get it out to the corners, out to the edges. Now, like I said, this is optional. I know people who have made cosmic brownies with these, and they made like a 0 bite, 0 point frosting. If I can find that recipe that they shared with me, I will write it out in the description. All right. Don't want any of that marshmallow goodness to go to waste. Now you can have a 1.5 teaspoons of this marshmallow fluff. I don't know about all of them, but I know this one, for 0 bites. So I've calculated it so that you're not even getting the 1.5 teaspoons. So that's 0 bites that I've just added, so you could stop there. But if you want to create a little s'mores thing, these 3 are just going to add 1 bite, which if you're looking for a s'mores brownie, this might be the way to go. And speaking of bites, I haven't told you how many bites these brownies are. As they are, without the s'mores add-on, these are only 2 bites apiece. They're thick, they're chewy, they're really very good. Now this will make 9 servings. And actually I might have been able to get away with just 2 of the graham crackers, but you want to pat it in a little bit so it'll stick to that marshmallow while it's hot. And now what you have to do is the waiting game. This is the hard part. You have to let this sit in the pan to cool down for half an hour. Then you can take it out. But you want it to cool in the pan first so that it can set into its shape. If you pull it out too early, still too hot, it may fall apart. So you just want to keep it in the pan, let it cool there for half an hour, and then we'll pull it out. So I will see you then. All right, so this has been sitting in the pan for about a half an hour. I'm going to lift it out and try to get it off of the foil. So I'm going to use this long spatula to help me peel the foil back, hopefully. Or not. There it goes. All right, so now before I cut into this, I'm gonna let it cool. Now that it has no foil underneath, it's not in the pan, I'm gonna let it cool a little bit more, about another 15-20 minutes, and then we will cut into it. Okay, while we've been waiting for this to cool off, my muscles have gotten a little twitchy but I will do my best to cut this into 9 relatively even pieces. I'm going to transfer this to a cutting board, and okay, to help me out, I'm going to use a ruler. And for some reason, 9-inch cake pans don't make 9-inch cakes or brownies. It's usually like 8.5, probably because they're measuring from the outside of the pan maybe. So I will just forgo the, oh, I do want to spray my knife a little bit with some cooking spray just so that it doesn't get too sticky, especially with that marshmallow on top. If you didn't have the marshmallow and graham cracker on top, these would be 2 bites each. It would be 4 bites for 2, and for 3 it would be 7 bites. So you could get pretty decadent and not really mess up your points too badly, or your bites. Okay, these don't look exactly even, but it is what it is. Now, the calories for these, if you don't have the additional topping like I have, calories are 109, fat is 3.2 grams, carbs are 50.8 grams, and protein is 5.7 grams. Now, if you do add these toppings, I did calculate for that, and the calories would go up to 140 for one of these s'mores brownies. The macros are fat 3.7 grams, carbs 57 grams, and protein would go to 6.1 grams. Now, as far as bites or points, these would be 3 bites for 1, as it is with the s'mores topping. But when you get to 2, it would jump up to 7. So you know that iTrackBites WW math. Okay, so there you have it. Some low bite, low point, chewy, fudgy brownies, with or without the topping. So I hope you will give these a try, and if you do, comment below and let me know how you like them or what additions you might have made to them. Like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Also hit that notification bell for the next time that I upload a video. So I am going to go and enjoy some of these, and I hope you will as well. Until next time, bye.